Let's go live then.
You are live.
We are live. This is Senate Education Committee on February 6th. Back from the break, 3 o'clock. We're just going to spend the next half hour or so with two bill sponsors and with our legislative counsel, Leslie James, who is joining us via video. We're going to start with Senator Boulay.
Thank you very much.
That's 15.
That's 15. Yes, indeed. For the record, Senator Martine LaRocque. So happy to be back here in my old stomping ground. Good to see everybody. And happy to be talking about literacy today and reading instruction. This is Bill S-15, and I'll give you a little bit of the history of why we're here and what we're doing with this bill. Last year, this committee took it upon themselves to address what we were seeing in some of our schools and hearing from some of our teachers and educators across the state, that our reading scores were lagging and not up to the expectations that some folks in the field had. So we took it upon ourselves to do something about it. This is sort of a continuation of work that started with Act 28 in 2021, the Advisory Council on Literacy, which was really digging into what we were doing for reading instruction across the state.
Did we lose Beth?
I think she just went off.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Keep going.
She didn't want to steal my thunder. So I can say that, one of the things that we were really trying to dig into was the effectiveness or lack thereof of sort of this whole language method of teaching reading, which has been proven to be somewhat controversial and perhaps not as successful as folks would have wanted. So this bill is really focusing on the science of reading and instruction that's based in science and, brain science and so on. So that's what we were trying to do with S-204. Now, S-15 is really kind of a correction. As you will see, there is one particular word that was causing some confusion in the field. And that really has to do with the screening that we put into place really for K through 3, right? We wanted to make sure all kids were being screened so that if they had a reading deficiency, such as dyslexia or any other reading deficiency, they were getting screened and then getting the necessary supports that if they needed it, they were getting it. We all know that K through 3 is really important because that is when you learn to read. After 3rd grade, you start using reading as a tool to learn. So it's a really critical period. But the sort of theme of our bill was the screening, but also making sure that everyone was getting the supports that they needed, regardless of where they were in school. And the confusion came with this, this word such, as you will see on page 3. And I know Beth will go into it a little bit more. But as you can see, we talk about approved school, a public school or approved independent school that's eligible to receive public tuition that offers instruction in grades kindergarten, 1, 2, or 3 shall provide systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students. And then the following sentence says, in addition, it said such schools, and that word such was confusing people because did it mean just schools that had K1, 2, or 3, or did it mean all schools? So that's what we're trying to clean up here. I will let Beth get into a little bit more detail, but we just want to make sure that students are getting the necessary supports and resources that they need to read at or above the grade level. And that is what I have for today. But I'm happy to take questions.
So this is being read as saying the such refers back to.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And to be honest, I couldn't remember how we got there. And yeah. So
Price says the same thing, but this change says it better.
exactly. It's all about
interpretation needed.
I was gonna say it's all about the interpretation, and folks have been a little bit confused about how to interpret that. So yeah.
Yes.
But while we're in the topic,
Yes.
why not all schools. All Vermont schools.
This bill isn't
I know,
changing anything but the word
I
such.
know that. I'm just, is it worthy having the come? Maybe it's,
It might be, but that's not, I
it's
mean, I'm not on this
humane to-
committee anymore, so I can't.
So all you're asking is just, this is what you're doing, just to put it, get rid of such and add in these,
I think as Beth would say, that is the only change being contemplated in this bill. Yes. As far as I know.
so it's just amending the bill basically, right?
Well, it's a new bill, but it's a change.
Because this. How do you determine at 3 that they're ready to, that they're doing? Is that up to the schools to say they are? Or
So,
because that's when I never read well and learned to read better as it got older.
mhm,
But now I know my son, who's 35, that he has somebody that graduated that, you know, for him to sit down and read this, he'd be really struggling. And if this is addressing, you know, literacy, is there anything, should we just not mess with anything else if we wanted to add to it, or?
well, so I think you bring up a really good point, which is that I do think you should take testimony on this. I don't think you should just, you know, take this as, you know, this is a done deal. I do think you should take testimony because I'm not in the field and I don't know how it's been playing out or how it's being interpreted. And the other thing is, I don't know how this is being rolled out in schools and if this is going to cause problems.
Yeah, we're just thank you for that. And we are going to today, we're just doing the introduction and understand what it says and then, you know. Yes,
what was the effective date of the change that was approved last year? Is it already in effect? Is this already in effect or is this?
Yeah, this is being rolled out. That's why it's important to take testimony. Okay.
Thank you, good pass. That's
Yeah,
a good
good pass, yeah.
So this was, that's 204.
This was.
This is like an amendment.
Yeah, it says right there.
Amendments.
so your question was, did it take effect July 1 or 20?
Right, is it already in
And
effect?
I assume the answer is yes. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and if this were to pass, it would be on passage. But I'm happy to stay with Beth.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, that'd be
today.
great.
And so so this is Beth St. James, our council from legislative council, in this area. So we had the bill introduction and now I guess I'll call to walk through such as it is with Beth St. James.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I think we should do a couple of things here. One is walk through the bill. 2, I'm prepared to show you this language in context as to how it appeared in Act 139, which was the literacy bill last year. So you can see kind of how that change happened. But before we do either of those things, since this is your first walkthrough this session, I think we should just do a little reminder about what you are looking at. Would it be helpful if I shared my screen or do you all have the bill in front of you?
We have it in front of us if you refer to it by line, page and line, or,
Great.
okay.
Okay, so just to do a little orientation, and this will apply to this bill and every other bill we look at, every other amendment we look at, all of them. If you see language, so for example, I'm starting on page 1, section 1, line 13. It says 16 VSA 2903 is amended to read. So it's orienting you to what this section of the bill is going to do. And then all of the language that comes after it belongs to that section. You'll notice that there's no highlight, there's no strike throughs, there's no underlined language on this first page. That's because this is all current law. So if you see language in a bill with no underlining and no strike through, it is current law. It is the law we all have to follow, and it went into effect in various times over the years. So for this bill, in order to orient everyone, it's a small change as far as the amount of space it takes up, but in order to orient the reader to where this change fits into the current law, we're looking at the whole statute. So the whole statute on line 14 on page 1 is preventing early school failure reading instruction. And then there are policies and directives on page 2 that there's no contemplation of change there. The only change is on page 3, starting on line 8 and ending on line 9. And the change is exactly as you all have been discussing. So subsection C, reading instruction, requires public schools and approved independent schools to provide K through 3 explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students. And then this bill contemplates changing that word such to all public schools and approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition for the requirement that there's supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student whose reading proficiency falls below proficiency standards. How those students are captured and determined is taken account in other places of the law, not here. All this is saying is current law says such schools are required to provide this follow-up. And that such, as you've already pointed out, would naturally refer back to lines 6 and 7, grade, K through 3. So this bill is contemplating requiring all schools, so not limiting it to K through 3 for that requirement to provide supplemental reading instruction. I do think well, let me ask, would it be helpful to see what this language looked like in a markup from S204 last year, or are you good to go? You've got the concept of this bill and you want to move on?
I think we get the concept. So is this, would you characterize this, if either one of you, as a technical correction, or, I mean, I realize it has substantive impact, but is this what you think the committee had intended? And it came, or did you actually have different discussions and this was initially placed here for a reason?
So whether something is a technical correction or not is slightly subjective. It's not a black and white science behind that. I would say that I would not submit this to the technical corrections bill. And I don't think it would be eligible for the technical corrections bill. Whether or not this, what S15 is proposing to do here is within the legislature's intent of what they were intending to do under Act 139 last year, I think would be more appropriate question for the sponsor. But I do agree that this is making a substantive change to the requirements under the law.
I would say that it was our intent to provide support for all of the grades K through 12. That was our intent. So that's why when this was pointed out to me, I felt like I had to speak to it. I don't know if Senator Weeks or Senator Williams wanted to chime in, but
no, I agree with Senator Hill.
That was that work for time. Okay. Well, thank you.
thank you for having me.
We have now been produced.
Yeah, I look pleased. I'd love to see who comes in to testify and what kind of testimony you get, and it'll be interesting to follow the discussion.
If you have suggestions, let us know.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for the chair doing those. It was good.
Who's this now?
Yeah, there's some guys coming up there. Okay. We're now just going to get introduced to S21. As it turns out, the sponsor is right here.
Thank you. So for the record, I'm Senator Terry Williams from the Rutland District, and I'm here to report Bill S21, Vermont's phones and social media free schools bill. This bill is but one piece of a rather large puzzle that legislatures all over the country are trying to fit together to help keep our kids safe and healthy. With S21, we can take decisive action on identified problems in schools and to share the solutions statewide to help increase student academic success, improve mental health, and increase social cohesion. Local, national, and international data shows that kids and teens are spending many hours every day on social media, accessed through their electronic devices. For the 40% of Vermont high school students who report using social media more than once every hour, we know that they're accessing social media while they're at school. You'll see in the findings section, former U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy stated in 2024 that schools should be phone-free zones for students. This bill has two main provisions. First, it directs all Vermont schools, public and independent, to adopt and implement a policy prohibiting the use of cell phones and personal electronic devices during the entirety of the school day. This will include smartphones, smartwatches, personal tablets, AirPods, and other devices. This type of policy is known as a bell-to-bell policy because it's in effect from the arrival bell to the dismissal bell. This is an important element of the bill because it alleviates the considerable burden currently placed on teachers to police student device use during the school day. Without the confusion of certain times of day or certain parts of the areas of the school, the policy is easier to implement and easier to follow. Second provision in the bill states that schools may not communicate directly with students through social media. This is something we've heard about specifically in the area of team sports. For example, a student who is new to, say, the hockey team is told that they need to get Snapchat because that's where the team keeps in touch. There are two notable exceptions to the phone-free policy. One, approved medical use of a personal device, and two, approved special education use as specified in an individual education plan, IEP, or 504 plan. Given the known dangers and potential for harm caused by or experienced on social media, the endorsement or requirement of its use by a school district is rife with issues, and more to the point, there are a number of suitable alternative communication methods, and we know the social media is by design an unsafe product for kids, and therefore schools should not encourage or require students to use it for any school purpose. And to the question of students, they may be primary caregivers to younger siblings or other family members and need to be in frequent or immediate contact with those family members. I believe that our educational professionals can find safer, more supportive ways to help that student through these challenging responsibilities. School landlines, student email addresses, and even messaging platforms connected to district email platforms can be used to reach a student whenever necessary, or by a student reaching out to someone else. There are many frequently asked questions. One is a concern about student safety in an emergency like an active shooter situation. Law enforcement officials, school safety officials, and others will say that students are in fact less safe in an active shooter situation if they have their phones with them. There's a potential to alert the shooter to their location with noise from notifications or trying to talk into the phone. Students are also prone to spreading and reading misinformation in real time on social media. It's difficult to sort out what's accurate and what's not, so they might be getting incorrect information about things as vital as the location of the shooter. It's also likely that a student focused on the phone is not paying attention to the adult in the room or the building who's trying to keep them safe. And finally, there's issues of jammed communication lines when hundreds of students are using their phones at the same time as teams of first responders. So I also want to address the question of cost for the implementation of the bill, because this has been an issue. There are many examples of low-cost storage options, and you notice the bill doesn't mandate a type of storage. Schools and districts are free to choose the method that works the best for them. For some, it could be the Yonder pouch, which is more expensive option, but there are large schools in districts all over the country that have created foam storage by using things like manila envelopes and milk crates or pencil pouches in storage containers. This can be done with little or no cost. We have an opportunity with S21 to join 8 other states that have already enacted regulations regarding foams in schools. Largely from this bill contributed significantly to and will likely be introduced in Massachusetts, Maine, Kansas, Florida, and Washington, D.C. additionally. Our kids need a break from the distractions and harms of a phone-based environment, especially in school, which is a time to reach key developmental and social milestones, to focus on learning and social interaction with their peers. Any questions?
None yet, what was from me. Why don't we first have a walkthrough?
Yep.
Hello, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. We're going to walk through S21 as introduced. The bill starts on page 1, line 14, bless you, with a findings section. Do you want to walk through the findings?
Yeah, why, I guess we probably spend a ton of time doing that, but we can, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Findings are a little awkward. They're hard to summarize. So I'll just read them. So the NEA has reported in August 2024 that 83% of its members support a policy to prohibit use of cell phones and personal electronic devices for the entire school day. In June 2024, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy called on Congress to pass legislation requiring warning labels on social media. We're moving on to page 2. Because these products have not been proven safe for children, he also called on schools to ensure that classroom learning and social time are phone-free experiences. Youth in Vermont are in a mental health crisis. According to the 2023 Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 63% of high school students said their mental health was sometimes to always not good. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for Vermont's youth. The youth mental health crisis is driving up education costs in Vermont. In 2024, Legislative Education Costs Survey conducted by the Vermont Agency of Education found that the number of positions dedicated to mental and behavioral health in the 48 responding supervisory unions and districts was 142 in fiscal year 2022. By fiscal year 2025, that number had risen to 790. Extrapolated to include the remaining 4 remaining supervisory unions, those positions account for close to $53 million of education spending. The Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey also found that 80% of high school students use social media several times a day, with 40% using social media at least 1 time every hour. 60% of middle school students reported using social media several times a day, with 32% using it at least once per hour. I'm on page 3 now. Phone-free policies have been shown to reduce the incidence of hazing, harassment, and bullying in some schools. Lamoille South Supervisory Union instituted a phone-free school day policy in August 2024. Data from one of the supervisory union's high schools showed that 9 hazing, harassment, and bullying claims from August to October 2023 before the policy, and just 2 claims during the same period in 2024 after the policy was enacted. Use of social media by school employees runs the risk of violating the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Given this risk, as well as the growing body of research that social media is not safe for kids, schools and students are best served by utilizing communication tools other than social media. As of November 2024, 8 states have passed laws that ban or restrict cell phone use in schools. So those are all findings. And then in section 1, there's also a piece of legislative intent. So it is the intent of the General Assembly for all students in Vermont to access the benefits of a phone and social media free school environment, which promotes focus, improves mental health, and increased social cohesion.
Beth, can I interrupt quickly? Did that intent section, was it put in because of LCAR requesting that we do that more often? Or is that something that you were doing anyway?
The intent sections are totally a policy choice by sponsor.
Okay. We've had discussion at LCAR about looking for that more often to help us then determine whether, okay.
When there are when you are delegating that authority, that legislative authority through rulemaking, yes, legislative intent and findings can be very helpful to make sure. There's no rulemaking in this bill.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
So on page 4, section 2 is adding a subchapter to chapter 9, which is the school district chapter. And it's often where we see language added when it's requiring school districts to develop policies around something. So for example, school branding lives in this chapter. The hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention policies live in this chapter. So we're creating a whole new subchapter here for cell phone and personal electronic device use in schools. You'll notice this entire bill is just underlined language. That means it's all brand new language. And the proposal of the bill is for this to become law. And if it were to become law, and someone wanted to make a change to it next year, and they wanted to bring a bill in front of you, none of this would be underlined, right? Because it would be current law if the legislature passed it. But it's all brand new right now. So we start with adding section 581 to Title 16, creating some definitions that only apply to this subchapter. So cell phone is defined as any device capable of using cellular technology to facilitate voice service through a commercial telecommunications company, regardless of whether the device can access internet services and electronic mail. Electronic device means any device that transmits sounds, images, text, messages, videos, or electronic information, electronically records, plays, or stores information, or accesses the internet or private communication or information network. Parent means a parent of a student and includes legal guardians who are legally authorized to make education decisions for the student. School, and remember, we're just talking about this subchapter, means any public school, independent school, career and technical center, or pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten provider located in Vermont. Social media, and we're going to jump to page 5, means a website or internet medium that permits a person to become a registered user, establish an account, or create a profile for the purpose of allowing users to create, share, and view user-generated content through such an account profile. Enables one or more users to generate content that can be viewed by other users of the medium, and primarily serves as a medium for users to interact with content generated by other users of the medium. And then student means an individual currently enrolled or registered at a school located in Vermont, and we're referring to that school definition that we just walked through. So then, why do we need all those definitions? Well, section 582 is proposing to require each school board or governing body of an independent school or private pre-K provider to adopt and implement a policy, and I'm on line 15, to prohibit student use of cell phones and personal electronic devices at school from arrival to dismissal. The policy may prohibit a student from bringing a personal electronic device to school at all. It may prohibit it may prohibit a student from bringing, it may require personal electronic devices to be placed in a designated area on school property, or allow for utilization of a product that functions to secure the personal electronic device, such as a device locker or lockable pouch. At the very bottom of page 5, going on to page 6, is subsection B with exceptions. So the policy has to provide an exception for students to possess and use cell phones or personal electronic devices If a licensed physician or licensed APRN determines that such possession or use is necessary for the health of the student, and a school may require documentation to support that. And the policy also has to have an exception for students to possess or use a cell phone or personal electronic device if such use or possession is part of a student's IEP or 504 plan. That's it. That's the policy section. Then we move on to section 583. I'm on page 6, line 10. Prohibition of integration of social media platforms into education. So schools, school districts, and supervisory unions are prohibited from utilizing social media for communication with students directly, and asking, requiring, or permitting students' use of social media for school activities, out of school academic work, homework, school sports, or extracurricular clubs and any other school-sponsored activities. Schools are required to have in place measures to prevent students from accessing social media while on school-issued electronic devices and while under the supervision of the school. The findings and the effective date section of this bill would take effect on July 1, but the requirement of this year, but there were requirement for there to be cell phone policies and the social media prohibitions would not take effect until December 1, 2025.
Thank you. Was this bill modeled on a bill from a language from a different state, from another state? Or did you just come up with it
S-284 was bill we introduced last session.
last session?
And then the states that have adopted it have pretty much adopted our original language.
Okay, so you're saying our initial was, and, okay. Questions about what it means, we'll get into the policy discussion at a different time. So, and I'd love to bring in some witnesses.
One quick question though.
Yeah.
It says private kindergarten, or why isn't it even private schools? Because we can't interject into a private school.
That is something that we'll have to talk about.
That's something to
But the bill actually does say in here, I think it does include tuition students.
Independent schools, but doesn't say private schools.
Well, in Vermont, they're called independent schools. They're,
regardless if,
yeah,
Okay.
there's no such term. Yeah, that's private.
because of private kindergarten.
Yeah, oh, well, private kindergarten, actually, maybe, that's different, actually,
Yeah.
right, Beth, is that, yes, that's right. Yeah, that is different,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's not tuition.
Would you like me to explain what that term means?
Sure,
So your chair is correct. In Vermont, we call private schools independent schools. It's a legally defined term in Title 16, and you will never see the word private in there. But private pre-kindergarten, pre-qualified pre-kindergarten providers is a term in Title 16, Section 820. I will look it up, but it is, so public schools that have pre-K programs are just public schools. And then if an approved independent school or just an independent school has a pre-K program, it's just an independent school. But the majority of pre-K programs out there that are receiving Act 166 funds are neither in a public school nor in an independent school. They're in what we commonly consider daycare centers. And so they are what we would consider a private pre-qualified pre-kindergarten provider. And so because the term independent school doesn't sweep all of those programs in, that term was added to the definition of schools.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. yes.
I have two questions for the sponsor. First, on page 3, line 8, the phrase runs the risk. of violating is kind of mushy. And I'm wondering why it was left kind of in a vague state as opposed to a definitive, this is a problem, this is a violation. So page 3, line 8, where it says use of social media by school employees runs the risk of violating, dot, dot, dot. I mean, it seems kind of,
Oh, I'm not familiar with the bill. I mean, actually it's privacy, isn't it federal law? The FERPA? So I guess I would take more examination.
okay, no, that's fair. Okay.
So, what's going on there with line 8?
So I will say the findings were provided to me by the sponsor. So as far as word choice there, I don't necessarily know that I'm the person who chose that wording, but I will say it's relatively safer to say that conduct runs the risk of violating federal law than just a blanket statement, because there's always going to be exceptions to every rule. So I don't see a legal problem with that. You might have a policy debate over it, and we could certainly change it if you choose to take this bill up.
And second, just for clarification, the bill does not prohibit the communication via social media between the parent and the school and the parent.
I think it would. Let's see. So if we look at page 6, you're right, it does say students, it doesn't say parents.
What line?
Page 6,
Line 13. Well, starting on line 12.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one word correction as well. I think on page 6, line 4, a school may, I think that should be a school should. I just, that way, it's like you really should. That should doesn't mean you have to.
Yes, it does.
Should is should. If you should do it, doesn't mean you have to. Shall does. Is that correct?
No, we don't actually use the term should. We shouldn't. You want your language that, findings aside, don't get me going on findings. They're almost never helpful unless you're doing a really big, complicated, constitutionally questionable bill. Findings, we can get lost in the weeds of the wording of findings. But if we're looking at the law, you want to be as precise as possible. So it's either may or shall. That would be my recommendation. The may is permissive. So that builds in, you don't have to. When you start getting into the should, halfway between may and shall, there's going to be lots of debates in the field over what that really means. And you want to try and avoid those debates. You want to make sure that the law, everyone who has to follow the law is, can read it and is clear on what it means. And so I am always going to encourage you that it should be may or shall.
That's why I like to debate when we do it.
Anything else, anybody? Well,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Thank you.